The morning began earlier than usual. Before the first gray hint of dawn touched the hills, a quiet stirring moved through the camp. Sleeping bags rustled. Zippers whispered open. The faint metallic clink of cups and cookpots carried softly across the clearing. The air held that dry coolness that comes just before sunrise in the hills east of the Golan. It would not last long. Everyone knew that. The group had grown accustomed to the rhythm of pilgrimage. Wake, gather, walk, listen, pray. But this morning carried a different weight. It was the last morning before the border. Israel lay just ahead. David rose slowly and stretched his back, then reached for his backpack. The sky was still dark enough that the stars remained sharp overhead. A faint wind moved through the scrub grass, whispering against stones and scattered bushes. Pearl lifted her head from where she slept near his feet. "Morning, girl," he said quietly. Her short tail whirled around happily. David unzipped the top pocket of his pack and began the familiar process of sorting gear. Passport, water bottle, notebook, Bible. The border crossing tomorrow meant everything needed to be organized. He pulled out a small pouch and checked again that his passport was inside. The little navy booklet looked strangely fragile, considering the importance everyone suddenly placed upon it. Pearl sat up, watching him carefully as if supervising the process. "You're not crossing any borders," David told her, "so don't get too excited." She blinked slowly, a little shocked. This couldn't be true. She hurried off to find Mom. Around the clearing, other members of the group were doing the same thing, organizing, not finding Mom. Sean knelt beside his backpack, spreading items on a flat stone as if preparing for inspection. Aoife stood nearby, braiding her long auburn hair. The rising light caught red highlights in the waves as she tied the braid loosely over her shoulder. Maria was already awake and moving quietly through the brush along the edge of the clearing, examining plants between the rocks. Her leather pouch hung from her belt. She knelt occasionally to collect a leaf or stem, studying it carefully before placing it inside. Frances and Claire sat together near the small fire pit, speaking softly. Agnes, the marbled polecat, peeked from Claire's pack, her curious nose twitching at the smells of morning. Further off, Colby and the desert father stood side by side, looking toward the south, and a little apart from them all stood Charlie. He had already packed his bag. He watched the sun beginning to color the eastern horizon, his hands resting loosely on the straps of his backpack. The faintest smile touched his face, the familiar one everyone had come to know during the journey, if they hadn't already come to know it through social media. Breakfast was simple that morning: flatbread, dried fruit, and hot tea. No one lingered over it. The mood was thoughtful, even a little solemn. They had walked together for weeks now. Every day had its conversations, its laughter, its debates, its quiet moments of prayer. And today, something was changing. David finished his tea and stood. "All right," he said, "let's get moving early." Francis nodded. "Yes," he said gently, "we must reach the frontier by late afternoon." The path ahead climbed slowly through a landscape of dry grass and scattered stone. The hills rolled gently but steadily upward. In the distance, the land rose toward the plateau of the Golan Heights. The border itself lay somewhere beyond those ridges. The group began walking. Pearl trotted happily along the trail, occasionally stopping to sniff something important. As the sun rose, the heat came quickly. Dust puffed beneath their boots. The land here felt quieter than the places they had traveled earlier in Syria. Villages had grown sparse. The road itself was little more than a rough path winding between rocky hills. David walked beside Charlie. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, David said, "You've been unusually quiet this morning." Charlie smiled. "Thinking." "About the border?" Charlie shook his head. "No," he said, "about blueberries." David blinked. "Blueberries?" Charlie laughed softly. "Yeah." He kicked a small stone off the path as they walked. "You ever hear the story?" David shook his head in bewilderment. Charlie glanced toward the hills ahead. "My little daughter wanted me to stay home one day rather than leave for a trip. I was going to be talking at a variety of universities. I told her, 'Daddy has to go on a business trip with Jesus so I can pay for your blueberries.' That seemed to completely satisfy her. My wife uses it even now." They walked a little further in silence. David smiled slowly. I like that story. Me too, Charlie nodded. It makes me feel a lot better about leaving my family. Further ahead on the trail, Colby and the Desert Father were engaged in a lively discussion. Colby spoke with calm intensity. But truth must be spoken clearly, he said. The Desert Father nodded. Yes, he said, but always with love. Charlie caught up to them. Or, he added with a grin, with a microphone. Colby smiled. And sometimes without one. Charlie laughed. I actually like that better. The Desert Father studied him thoughtfully. You enjoy disagreement, he said. Charlie nodded. I think it's healthy. Colby agreed. If it's done in charity. Exactly. Charlie pointed back toward the group behind them. You see that? He said. Maria was explaining something to Sean and Aoife while holding up a plant she had gathered. That's what I like, Charlie said. People learning together. Colby nodded. Yes. The Desert Father added quietly, Truth grows best in conversation. Charlie grinned. Now that's a quote I'm stealing. Around midday, they stopped briefly for water. The hills were now steeper, the ground more rocky. In the far distance, a faint line marked the edge of the Golan Plateau. Francis gathered everyone. We must speak about tomorrow, he said. The group sat in a rough circle. Francis knelt in the center and drew a simple line in the dust. This, he said, is the border. Everyone leaned forward. The crossing may take all day. He pointed beyond the line. There will likely be soldiers, questions, inspections. Sean raised a hand. How many questions? Francis smiled. Many. Everyone laughed. Francis continued. Remain calm, answer simply, be patient. Colby added, truthfully. Francis nodded, yes. Maria asked, will they search our packs? Almost certainly. David glanced at his backpack. Good thing we're organizing today. Francis nodded again. Tonight you should prepare everything carefully. Claire added gently, nothing hidden, nothing confusing. Agnes poked her head further out of the pack, as if listening closely and wondering if she was confusing. They walked again. The heat of the afternoon settled over the hills. Dust coated boots and trousers. Charlie slowed slightly until he was walking beside Francis. I should tell you something, he said. Francis looked at him calmly. Charlie smiled a little. I won't be continuing tomorrow. Francis nodded slowly. I thought perhaps not. Charlie glanced at him. You knew? Francis smiled. Pilgrims sometimes have different roads. Charlie chuckled. Fair enough. Francis asked quietly, where will you go? Charlie shrugged. Somewhere that needs me. He paused, and there's a blueberry situation I might need to check on. Francis laughed softly. Yes, he said. Blueberries can be urgent. Later that afternoon, the group reached a high ridge. From there, they could see farther south. The land flattened into the plateau of the Golan Heights. Somewhere out there lay the frontier. They made camp among scattered stones and low brush. Everyone immediately began unpacking. Passports were checked again. Packs were reorganized. Loose items were secured. David sat on a rock, sorting his belongings carefully. Pearl watched with deep concern. Charlie approached. You ready for tomorrow? David nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. Charlie sat beside him. You'll do fine. David smiled. Thanks. Charlie hesitated. I thought I should tell you I'm leaving tonight. David looked at him. Before the crossing? Charlie nodded. Yeah. David studied him. Well, he said finally, we'll miss you. Charlie smiled. Thanks. Pearl nudged Charlie's hand. He scratched her ears. Take care of them, okay? Pearl wagged her tail solemnly. As evening settled, the group gathered one last time. Charlie stood before them. I've got to head out tonight, he said casually. A small ripple of surprise moved through the group. Aoife asked, Already? Charlie nodded. Yeah, I'm needed somewhere else. Sean frowned. Where? Charlie grinned. Probably a blueberry farm. Everyone laughed. Francis stepped forward. You've walked well with us. Charlie nodded respectfully. You guys taught me a lot. Colby said warmly, and you reminded us that courage can smile. Charlie's grin widened. I try. Claire hugged him. Agnes sniffed his sleeve suspiciously. The Desert Father clasped Charlie's shoulder. Walk in peace. Charlie nodded. You too. Finally, he turned to David. Take care of them, he said, motioning to the group. David smiled. I'll do my best. Charlie picked up his pack. The sun had nearly set. He walked a short distance down the trail, then turned once more. His familiar smile flashed across the twilight. Then he disappeared among the hills. That night, the camp was quieter than usual. Packs were lined neatly beside sleeping bags. Passports were tucked safely inside. The frontier waited just beyond the dark hills. Tomorrow they would cross into Israel, and the pilgrimage would change forever.